Sionagad, Kalialega Jigadoha, Kevin Stretch Dowadon. Welcome everyone, I'm Kevin Stretch, and welcome to the 73rd Cherokee National Holiday. Today we're doing more Cherokee talks. And today we have an amazing Cherokee citizen, Feather Smith, who's worked for the Cherokee Nation since 2007. She worked as a tour guide in the Diligwa Village at the Cherokee Heritage Center until 2015. She then served as a cultural biologist before becoming the current Ethnobiology Manager with the Secretary of Natural Resources Office. As the Ethnobiology Manager, she oversees the Cherokee National Seed Bank and helps care for the Cherokee Nation Heirloom Garden and native plant site. Feather has a Bachelor of Science in Fish and Wildlife Biology from Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Ladies and gentlemen, Feather Smith.
Well done. Sio Nagad, as he said, I'm Feather Smith. I am the Cherokee Nation Ethnobiology Manager. So we always get the question on what is ethnobiology? Of course, biology is the study of the environment, it's the study of life. When we add ethno at the front of that, we're actually talking about how a people interacts with their environment. So of course, we're concerned with Cherokee ethnobiology. So within our ethnobiology department, our primary role is to care for the heirloom garden, the native plant site, and to take care of the seed bank. But we also kind of, we do a little bit of everything when it comes to the environment and natural resources. We're sort of really a cultural component to all of that because our whole thing is to understand the Cherokee relationships and the way that we've always worked with our environment. So if you've ever come through before, this presentation is kind of similar to what we've had in the past, and I'll try to kind of throw some extra things in there that I don't always talk about. But this says, no self-respecting Cherokee would ever be without a corn patch. This saying is actually attributed to Redbird Smith, but it drives home just how important our heirloom crops were for us. We were an agricultural tribe. We've always been an agricultural tribe. And when we could harvest, when we were planting, anything that we were doing with those crops, it really, our entire life kind of revolved around that cycle. And so no self-respecting Cherokee would ever be without a corn patch. So if you didn't make it out yesterday, we did have some garden tours yesterday, but our heirloom garden, this is an aerial photo of the garden, and it sits just east of the Cherokee Nation complex. So it's kind of, a lot of people come through and they constantly say, I did not realize that this was here. Before I started in this role, I did not realize that that garden was there. If you've ever been over, prior to us moving the fishing derby, when we used to do it at the pond that's over there by the complex, this garden sits just in front of that area. So it's really neat to kind of have it so centrally located. It's right in the middle of everything else that we're doing. And in some ways, it really benefits us because we constantly have the questions on how do we deal with the deer and the squirrels, and so far that really isn't an issue for us because of where we're located. So this is a video, and I really just like to show it. It was one that Coms did for TikTok, but it just gives you a chance to see the heirloom garden from the air. We have a lot of symbols that we've incorporated in our beds throughout the heirloom garden, and we did that because we started getting lots of requests for tours throughout the wintertime when we really didn't have a whole lot growing. And so we wanted to add more culture into the site, and so we started laying all of our beds in culturally relevant shapes. Most of the symbols that you'll see out there are things that you would have seen in pre-contact artwork. So our pottery, our basketry, our carving, but then we have a couple of more modern designs too, like our butterfly, which we really put in to honor all of the pollinators, and we have a soligoog. We've got a water turtle down in there, which was originally supposed to be a doxy, but then after we got it all laid out, we got to realizing that it was definitely not a doxy, it was a soligoog. So there's two parts to this presentation. The first half of this, we're going to go over the Cherokee Nation Seed Bank, and then the second half, we'll talk more about some of the native plants, and I'm going to test your all's knowledge a little bit. So, of course, we are a people of the southeastern deciduous forest. prior to removal, Cherokees came from the southeast. We lived in parts of the Carolinas, the Virginias, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Georgia. Once the Removal Act happened, we came over on the Trail of Tears. The whole reason that I really like to point this out is initially we sat right in the heart of the eastern deciduous forest. But here in Indian Territory, we sit just on the fringes of the eastern deciduous forest. We're also on the fringes of tallgrass prairie, the cross timbers, but we like to point that out because there's really a lot of overlap in the environment. We luck out in this area that a lot of the plants that we were so reliant on in the southeast, we still have here. However, obviously, our climate is different, our system, our ecosystem is a little bit different. We've had some new plants that we've gotten to adapt to, but we were really, really fortunate that being on the fringe of that eastern deciduous forest, there is so much overlap. So, for the Cherokee Nation Seed Bank, we primarily grow Cherokee heirloom crops. When this program started, it was started for the preservation of Cherokee heirloom crops. We have always been known for growing things, especially corn and beans. Corn and beans are the big one for us. But then after that, we grow stuff like squash, pumpkins, gourds, native plants, native tobacco. The whole reason that the Cherokee Nation Seed Bank initially started is there was a conversation about having the Cherokee Nation represented in the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. In case you haven't heard about it, Svalbard is a seed vault that's located in Norway, and the idea of it was to almost kind of be like a doomsday vault. In case anything should ever happen, any man-made disasters, natural disasters, the hope was that this vault was going to survive and all of the seeds inside of it were going to survive. And they take seeds from countries around the world and they hold those seeds. They're a scientific endeavor, so they also have some projects and things that they do as well. Being that we're a sovereign nation, we had some citizens who wanted to see the Cherokee Nation be represented. Everybody kind of sat down and started talking, and the one seed that everyone could think of, which is a favorite, is the Cherokee purple tomato. Cherokee purple tomatoes are a beautiful tomato. They taste wonderful. We are definitely not haters of the Cherokee purple tomato, but they are Cherokee in name only. It is not something that was cultivated by the tribe. The story behind the purple tomato is it was either a man or a family who lived in North Carolina who may or may not have been Cherokee that cultivated it, and then it was given that name either because it was in our homelands or because he was a Cherokee, but again, it wasn't actually cultivated by the tribe. And so the team had gone back and had said, you know, this really isn't a Cherokee seed, and so then they said, well, we're an agricultural society, we have seeds, so let's just send the seeds we do have. And when everybody sat down and started looking, we could not find any seeds. We didn't have any seeds here at the time. And so Pat Gwynn, who was instrumental in getting this whole thing started, got together with some people. They started doing some research. We're having a really, really hard time finding seeds here on the reservation. And so then at that point, they started working with the Eastern Band of Cherokees. We worked with some different educational institutions. We worked with some heirloom crop experts around the country until eventually we were able to round up about 9 heirloom crop varieties that we could say with confidence that these are Cherokee seeds that we knew that had always kind of stayed, not so much in Cherokee hands, because like I said, we did pull some from educational institutions, but that we knew had always stayed within the lineage. We could actually kind of, just through story, kind of track their heritage. And so we were able to bring those back and with confidence say, yes, these are our seeds, they've always been our seeds. We tried to really just look for the things that we had cultivated prior to removal. And so at that point, we were able to come up with these 9 varieties. The issue that we ran into after getting hold of the seeds is that most of them weren't being grown for genetic preservation. So having hobbyists grow, having people grow in their gardens at home is a very important part of preserving heirloom crop seeds. However, if you're not growing with the intent of ensuring that those genetics remain pure, but also are getting kind of some mixed DNA in there to keep them from getting too specific, too narrow, you'll actually put those seeds at risk. And what we were seeing was that there were certain things like our Cherokee White Eagle corn didn't quite look right. Some of our beans didn't quite look right. They were all kind of just being mixed in together. And so that became the mission. The mission was that we were going to take these seeds and we were going to get them back into good genetic shape. And so they just started growing for that with just that mission in mind. And after a couple of seasons of doing that, we got to realizing that we only needed about this much seed for genetic stock. And they were coming up with gallons and gallons and gallons of seed. And so then Pat said, we need to give this back out to citizens. The idea, when it comes to owning anything, whether it be land, seeds, you know, the Cherokee way of thinking is that not one person, not one entity, not one government can own something that's Cherokee. It's something that is owned by every single citizen. And so Pat's idea was this naturally belongs to citizens, and we need to get this back out into citizens' hands. The first couple of years of the seed bank, of course, brand new program, they were practically calling people going, do you want seeds? Please take seeds. I think they distributed, 1,000, 2,000 packages of seed. That has slowly grown into what it is today, where we distribute about close to 10,000 packets of seed each year. It's become a very huge, very popular program, but it was completely, when we started it, it wasn't with this intent. So it was a little bit backwards, and we're learning how to kind of redo things now. And we're always trying to look to expand and things as well. So the first crop that we want to talk about is our corn. What we have pictured here is the Cherokee yellow flower, colored flower, and white flower corns. Flower corns are going to be best made into cornmeal. So people often ask if all of these things that we make or that we grow are edible, and they are, but flower corns are best made into cornmeal. White flour tends to be more common for hominy. The colored flour and the yellow flour make an awesome cornmeal, but you have to kind of get over the fact that especially colored flour is going to give you a red, a purple, or blue cornmeal, all depending on how your corn comes out. However, I've had it. It's some of the best cornmeal. Now, our Cherokee White Eagle corn is by far our oldest variety of seed that we grow. This is one that we have been growing for centuries, really one of our most sacred seeds. This is one that we know was carried across the trail. All of the texts say, the Eastern Band often says that this would grow up to be about 8 to 10 feet tall. Usually here in Oklahoma, it loves our heat so much it can get up to 15 feet tall. On a perfect stalk, each cob is going to be a bright red color, and then the kernels themselves are going to range from sort of a white-yellow color into a purple-blue color. Every single blue kernel should have a white eagle flying on the side of it. This was one of the things that we kind of had to get back up into shape, because when we first got our white eagle corn, they didn't all have a good white eagle on them like they were supposed to. It is a dent corn, so the ends of the corns are going to have dents in it. We don't want to see dents when we're looking at flower corns. Dent corns are a little bit tougher. Generally, aside from white eagle, dent corns tend to be more used for field corn. It's what we're going to feed animals out of, or also maybe make some of those other things like ethanol and all that type of stuff out of. A lot of people actually like to eat white eagle when it's still really, really green, before it goes into what they call the milking stage. At that point, it's tender enough that you can eat it kind of similar to sweet corn. But again, the texture is going to be different, the flavor is going to be different. But if you were going to eat white eagle corn, that was the one you'd want to eat it. Otherwise, again, this was our sacred corn. So, all of our crops are sacred. All of our crops are important. But corn, Selu, she was the one who really took care of us. And we often talk about why is it that we talk about Selu more than the others. And after years of growing out there on the site, I can tell you she's the most reliable. No matter what the year is going to be like, it usually is going to give us a good harvest. It may not always be a perfect harvest. It may not always look like you want it to look, but it's going to give a good harvest. And when you're growing for survival, this is the food that got us through the wintertime, the one that's the most reliable is the one that we're going to like the best. So Selu was so important for that reason, because when it gets into beans, she's a little more touchy. Of course, we oftentimes talk about growing in the Three Sisters method. We have a much longer history with corn and beans than we do with squash and pumpkins. Not to say that we didn't grow them, but we just had a closer relationship with corn and beans. So when we would grow these, you would plant your corn first. We need to let it get large enough to support the weight of our pole beans. And then the pole beans will crawl up the stalk of the corn. As they do that, they're going to add some structure to that corn, so hopefully it's less likely to get blown over. Beans also fix nitrogen out of the air into the soil. Corn likes to eat a lot of nitrogen. So those beans will essentially feed that corn, and those two things just really work well together. Out of our beans, We grow brown turkey gizzard, black turkey gizzard, Cherokee long greasy, and Trail of Tears beans. All of them can be eaten green like a snap bean, or you can dry them out and cook them like you would any other dried bean. Now with that said, corn tends to like Oklahoma heat. We generally don't have to fight with it too much. This has not been a good year for us with corn. We've got our corn growing. It was so cool and so wet for so long here that it really stunted the growth on our corn this year. Now our beans hate Oklahoma heat. Beans like to be planted a little bit earlier. All of our crops are technically warm weather loving crops. They need 4-inch soil temperatures, so 4 inches down of 65 degrees before they're really going to germinate. But with that said, beans don't like it once it gets above 93 degrees. And in Oklahoma, the vast majority of our summer is above 93 degrees. Once we get above 93 degrees, beans stop pollinating. If you get them far enough along by that point that it gets that hot, you'll have beautiful plants. They'll stay green, they'll stay beautiful as long as you baby them all summer. You'll have these gorgeous plants all summer long, but they won't pollinate, they won't give you a bean until it cools down below 93 degrees. At that point, we kind of shoot for two things here. We're either hoping that we get them planted early enough that we have enough time before it gets too hot that we can get a good spring crop. Occasionally it happens and we say spring, it's really early summer. Or we have to keep them alive through the heat of the summer and then hope that we get a really good fall crop. So, you know, most of the time, as long as we don't get an early freeze, we get our best crop in the fall time. Most of the time here in this area, we don't get a freeze until about the week before Thanksgiving. The years where it's been just totally crazy and it's happened as early as October, I hate to see it. I mean, we like cooled off temperatures, but I hate to see it because it always, you know, I'll be looking at the beans and they'll just be full of crops. They'll be full of beans and we'll end up losing a bunch of them for that reason. So that's really what we aim for. And so that is the reason that if you've come out to visit our site, we don't grow them together. We actually plant beans before we plant corn. You can do it here, you can plant them together. It just takes a little bit more care, it takes a little bit more time. And when we're growing for yield, we're really more focused on just what's gonna make the plants happier overall. And so I think in the future we might try to do some demonstration spots where people can actually see these things growing together. But overall, our beans have to be planted way before our corn do. The Georgia Candy Roaster squash, it is probably by far my most popular seed. It is the most requested seed. When we're growing in that Three Sisters method, corn and beans grow together. Squash actually kind of acts like a mulch. So the vines are really great at branching out across the ground. They kind of branch in between everything. They have these huge leaves. They shade the ground out. So it's going to help with moisture retention and it's going to cut down on weeds. And that's true for squash, the pumpkins, and the gourds, but we tend to think about the squash more. Georgia Candy Roaster, the squash themselves can get about 2 feet long. They can weigh up to 20 pounds. They don't always, but we're talking a huge squash. They're a winter squash. So when you go to harvest these things, we say leave about 2 to 3 inches of the stem at the end. We generally wait until that stem starts to turn brown, till it kind of starts to die off before we cut them off. And then if it's been properly harvested and it's properly stored, they'll keep all winter long. We can harvest these things in October and they'll still be good to eat come March. So it's a long storing winter squash. Georgia Candy Roaster squash hates Oklahoma heat as well. On top of that, all of the pests love the squash. This is an old heirloom variety, so it has not held up well to vine borers. It doesn't hold up. It can handle squash bugs. It's really the cucumber beetles that get us on the squash. There's just we're constantly kind of fighting to keep the squash happy. Now, my favorite is now the Cherokee tan pumpkin. You'll see that I push the Cherokee tan pumpkin a lot. We just started growing Cherokee tan pumpkins in 2021. So out of all of our heirloom crop varieties, this is our newest one. Cherokee tans are much smaller. So as you can see, really only about 8 to 10 inches in diameter. Bang for the buck for one squash plant, well, let me say this the other way around. For one pumpkin plant, I'm probably going to get about 3 times the amount of fruit, 3 times the amount of pumpkins on one plant versus what I would get from squash. For one squash and pumpkin fruit, I'm going to get about 3 times the amount of seed and a pumpkin than I'm going to get in squash. Even though they're so much smaller, they just produce a lot more. Again, part of it is the heat. They are far more tolerant of drought conditions, high heat conditions, and pests. So they just are a little bit easier to work with, especially in this area, and tend to yield a lot more than the squash do. With that said, both of them are wonderful, both of them are sweet. But if you're cooking a savory dish, Georgia candy roaster is a little bit better to use. We oftentimes say that any recipe calling for squash, pumpkins, sweet potatoes, you can use the Georgia candy roaster squash. However, it's not so sweet that you can't use it in a savory dish. The Cherokee tan pumpkin is sweet. And if you like to cook, use pumpkins in your savory dishes, you probably don't want to use this one. It's going to sweeten everything up. We can roast these, make them into a puree, stick a spoon in and try that puree without adding anything to it, and you will think that you've added 2 cups of sugar. It is some of the sweetest pumpkins. They make great pumpkin pies, very easy to roast and store the puree in the freezer or can it or something like that. But again, it's going to give you a bunch of pumpkins, so you have to think about that when you go to grow a Cherokee tan pumpkin. Now, gourds are kind of funny in that most of we grow 2 different types of gourds. So we have the buffalo gourd. Those are actually a gourd that's native to this area, and they will not cross-pollinate with the other gourds. But most of the gourds, things like dipper gourds, basket gourds, jewelry gourds, these are all actually native to the old world, to the Mediterranean, but they predate all European contact here in North America. Nobody's really quite sure how they wound up here, but the tribes have been growing them for a very long time. So they have a long history here. So we do offer the pumpkins as well. Dipper gourds kind of have the round end, but with the long handle growth, so they're good for water dippers. Then we have basket gourds, which are more round. They can kind of vary in size, but usually about like that. And then jewelry gourds are small, only about 3 inches in size, usually generally made into necklaces and used for carrying like medicines or something along that scale. Native tobacco. So we do grow native tobacco and offer that through the seed bank as well. Native tobacco, again, this is a sacred seed. You are always supposed to approach tobacco with respect when you're growing it, when you're using it. For our culture, it is taboo to use tobacco recreationally. It is such an important plant. It's meant for ceremonial use, for medicinal use. The nicotine content in native tobacco is about 9 to 10 times stronger than that of smoking tobacco. So I always have people who come to me and say, if we're not using this for ceremonial reasons, should we grow this at home? And what I always tell people is, again, approach the plant with respect. We are always supposed to show tobacco respect. But if you do that, it is a great plant to have in a home garden. It has natural pesticide uses, and so it'll kind of help keep some of those pests out of your garden. It does attract its own pest, but oftentimes what it'll do is it'll kind of draw some of those pests away from some of your other plants. It is a great attractor of pollinators. Bees, butterflies, hummingbirds all love tobacco. So I always tell this, anybody who's ever come out knows how this goes, but every year we get hummingbirds out to the site. We grow trumpet vines at the Heirloom garden. We grow jewelweed at the Heirloom garden. We have all of these plants that hummingbirds are attracted to. And regardless, we always get at least a couple of hummingbirds at the site. But my hummingbirds do not show up in big numbers until we have tobacco that is blooming for them. They don't bother with us most of the time unless they can get a nicotine fix. We've had a terrible year for tobacco this year. This is actually the worst year in the 10 years I've been here that we've ever had for tobacco. They're just really, really small. We only have about 3 or 4 plants. They're really small, really scrubby. And so John, who is our ethnobiology technician, he was out at the site a couple of weeks ago, and he was sitting over in the barn in between mowing, and he said all of a sudden this little hummingbird came in, and it flew right down and looked at him. And occasionally when you're out there, they'll do that. They'll come up and they'll look at you. And I've always said they always seem really happy generally when they come up. And he goes, this one didn't seem happy. He said, I would almost swear it was glaring at me. I said, you don't have any tobacco for it. So they're mad at us because we're not supplying them with tobacco. So if you like hummingbirds, the hummingbirds love tobacco. And a lot of Cherokee stories talk about the relationship between hummingbirds and tobacco. We have stories that talk about them carrying the seeds in their wings. And I think our origin of tobacco story actually talks about the hummingbird going and stealing it from Saw the geese and then bringing it back in his wings. So we do grow a whole host of native plants out there at the site now. After we had the site established, we kind of have a natural little spring that runs through the middle of it. And so our elders started saying that they wanted to see some native plants at the site. The very first thing that we introduced in was river cane, but then since then we probably have over 100 different plants out there. And so sunchoke happens to be one of them that we give out through the seed bank that is incredibly popular. Sunchokes are also referred to as Jerusalem artichokes. They are a sunflower. They get a small yellow sunflower on them. That's not really the impressive part about these plants. The flower itself can get about 8 to 10 feet tall, but it's actually the tuber that they're going to produce that is really the favored thing about these plants. They produce a tuber that can be eaten just like a potato. It is not a potato. It almost kind of looks somewhat similar to a ginger root, because any other type of tuber that you would see. But when you cook them up, fry them, you can use basically any recipe that you would use for potatoes. They come out very similarly. The flavor is a little bit nuttier than what you would get with a potato. You can also eat them raw. Now, the thing with sunchokes, and I always like to give the warning, because if you've never had sunchokes, and if you want to grow sunchokes, this is a good thing to know. The tubers store their starch as inulin. So for blood glucose levels, inulin's really good at stabilizing blood glucose. It'll actually kind of help to control it and stabilize it. So especially for people who are diabetic, these are far healthier to eat than potatoes are. But if you are not used to eating inulin, it's kind of like if you're not used to eating fiber and you eat too much fiber. Fiber is known to get your system going. Inulin is very much the same way. If you are not used to eating inulin and then you eat a bunch of it all at once, it's going to get the system going. So we always recommend with people, because anytime that we do events and we've had people eat sunchokes, they're always amazed when they get to try them at how good they taste. You know, we'll fry them up, we'll roast them, we'll do all those things, and people are just amazed at how great they taste, and they want to sit down and they want to eat an entire plate all at once. The first couple of times, it's better just to have a helping or two. The more cooked they are, the more they kind of break that inulin down, because again, it's going to get your system going. And so, for instance, a lot of the Europeans who came and stayed with Cherokees, the very first time that they got to talk about sunchokes, it was such a memorable experience that in their diaries, they talked about their nights filled with flatulence and the stomach upsets that they had. And so we like to give that warning out, because I will warn people and then they'll come back to me later on and they'll go, the night after we had the sunchokes, I had a bad night. And I'm like, you don't need to say anything more. And they're like, that's what you were talking about. Yes, yes. I generally, you know, if you kind of eat a lot of fiber, or if you're used to eating inulin already, this isn't going to be too hard on you. It's just that first time around. Now also, if you look down in that right-hand corner, there is a picture of actual wild potatoes. So one of our clans is the wild potato clan. Wild potatoes, the true, what we think of when we think of a wild potato, is actually this viney plant. It has a small tuber on it. It's more of a ground nut. So again, it's not a true potato, but the ground nuts themselves, a large one is about the size of a quarter. So they're a good food source. They're also a medicine source, but they're not a great food source because it takes a lot of them to get a decent amount. But sometimes wild potato is also translated into prairie or savanna clan. And I can tell you right now, the viney wild potatoes will not grow in the prairie or savanna. They like moist areas. They tend to be kind of more in shaded, foresty areas. Sunchokes will grow in the prairie and savanna. So this is a much more important food source of wild potatoes than the traditional, the more medicine version of the wild potato. All of the Cherokee gardens were surrounded in hedges of sunflowers, and it took us a long time to figure out what that sunflower was. It was sunchokes. So I mentioned earlier that this entire project started because of a conversation about Svalbard. Eventually, we had this whole thing, we got the seed bank and everything going, and we all kind of forgot about Svalbard. Not completely forgot, we would still talk about it, but that was no longer our focus. And so in 2019, Pat Gwynn did an interview with NPR that Svalbard, or some of the people at Svalbard, wound up getting a hold of, and then they reached out to us and said that they would love to have us represented at the vault, and they would love to store our seeds. And so then that became a conversation that we had to have, whether or not that was something that we still wanted to do and what the requirements were going to be. So they come back to us and they tell us that for us to put seeds into the vault, they were going to need something like, it was almost equivalent to about a 5-gallon bucket of seed. Now, we grow a lot of seed each year, but to have to provide that much seed out of each of our heirloom crop varieties would have probably decimated the seed bank that we give back out to citizens for 2 to 3 years. And so we went back to them, asked why it was that they needed so many seeds. And as I mentioned earlier, Svalbard is a scientific endeavor. They have their own work, they have their own research and things that they do. So they have research that they do on the seeds that come into the vault. That is not something to allow, especially non-Cherokees, but even us, to do any sort of genetic invasive research on our seeds is just so incredibly taboo. Again, these seeds are sacred, and if anybody was going to do that, it definitely needed to be a Cherokee. And so, you know, our Secretary of Natural Resources at the time and Pat had kind of sat down and talked about it without even really having to talk to anybody else, and quickly determined that's not something that we could do. So, you know, we kind of had to regretfully decline with them. And so they had come back, asked us why that was. We tell them, explain the whole thing to them. And after they sat down and had a conversation, they came back to us and said, what if we just store your seeds? And if we're only going to store your seeds and we're not going to do any research, we only need, it was a much smaller bag. It kind of comes out to about equivalent of a quart-sized bag of seeds to be sent to us. And so then again, everybody sat down, we all had a conversation, and we finally decided to go ahead and send seeds over. And it was a conversation because the thought, again, is this is, you know, a non-Cherokee entity holding Cherokee seeds, and this is something that we really wanted to do. But currently, we have our genetic stock that we grow out of each year. We have a backup genetic stock just in case anything should happen to our initial set. And then the idea was that this would give us a third place where our seeds are in 3 totally different places, but especially that if anything should ever occur, even within the reservation, our seeds were going to survive. And so then in 2020, right before COVID hit, we finally sent our seeds over to the vault. So this was the Secretary of Natural Resources at the time, but he is now our Attorney General, Chad Harshaw, and then of course Chief Hoskin, and they are holding the seeds that we wound up sending over to Svalbard. So this is actually a picture of the outside of the vault, and that is our seeds getting placed into the vault. The next caveat that we had before we sent our seeds over was that we had some very specific ways that we wanted them labeled. Again, Svalbard is a scientific endeavor. They have their way of doing things, and so they have their own language and all of that stuff that they put whenever they label seeds. And we came back to them and said, our seeds have to be listed first in their true names. And their true names are Cherokee, so it had to be listed in syllabary. And then they could use scientific names and all those other things. They had to kind of work and do some special stuff to be able to do that, but eventually they agreed. And so you can actually see, of course, there's our flag and our seal on the side of it, and you can't see the language, but on the ends there is the syllabary listed first and then scientific name and all those other things. So if anybody is interested in getting seeds, we offer seeds for the seed bank each year. We've changed a little bit over the years. If you had received seeds in years past, prior to this year, we've always been a first come, first served institution. We try to keep it that way for as long as we could. You know, when I started, we were still taking seed requests by email and by phone and even by walk-in, and eventually we wound up moving online. When we moved online, seeds started going a lot faster. Then a couple of years ago, we moved on to the Gadugi portal, and it became record-breaking fast. Our first year on the portal, we ran out of seeds after about 4 or 5 days. For anybody who had never gotten seeds prior to going to the Gadugi portal, we used to be able to offer them for, 3 weeks to a month before we would have to close down the seed bank. The last year that we offered it on the Gadugi portal for first come, first served, we ran out of seeds in 3 hours and 20 minutes. We were compared to Taylor Swift tickets. And so at that point, we started figuring out that we were going to have to do something a little bit different because, again, we're actually offering more seeds now than we've ever been able to offer in the past. Every year, we steadily increase just a little bit. But our citizenship, I mean, we are one of the largest tribes in the United States. We have well over 400,000 citizens. So when you're splitting that up amongst all of our citizens, they're going to go very quickly. And so, and of course, we allow each person who receives seeds to get 2 packets of seeds. So that actually ends up working out to about, a little under 5,000 orders. So we've had to change things up a little bit. So now we have moved to a lottery system. What we're hoping is that this next year we're going to open up applications sometime in January. We're going to try to leave applications up on the Gadugi portal for close to a month if we can, and just allow everybody who is interested to get their name in the hat And then after we close applications, we will start to do the lottery draw and determine who's going to receive seeds. Our hope is, of course, that eventually we can grow and maybe make the system a little bit better. Some people love it, some people hate it. But it did allow us to, we are getting to see the demand. We're getting to see now how many people are truly interested in getting seeds and what we need to kind of grow into going into the future. And then it also allowed all those people, you know, we have elders who aren't very good at getting online. We have people who are working or traveling and can't get online right when the seeds go live. And it just wasn't the most fair system for everybody involved, especially when we were running into technical difficulties that we couldn't get to quick enough when they run out in 3 hours. So we're definitely doing the lottery system again this next year, and we'll continue to listen to what everybody has to say and see how much we can grow in the coming years to see what we can do in years after. And that will be on the GodDugi portal. I mean, I kind of mentioned that, but hopefully it'll be on the GodDugi portal. You'll be able to log into your account and the applications will be available. And it's usually going to be listed under that year, so it should say Seed Bank 2026 specifically. You'll be able to see those applications pop up. There will be no need to worry if for whatever reason you're having a little bit of problems at first, because like I said, applications will be up for several weeks to a month, and so we want to, if you're not able to get in on that first day, there'll be plenty of time there to get in and submit applications. So we say that you will get snake bit, and we don't mean literally snake bit, although sometimes in gardening things happen. It's just that in gardening we don't always have the best luck. And so I did mention earlier on our Georgia candy roaster squash, this is a picture of a healthy squash. It says Osta, this is what we want our squash to look like. But we started having an issue the very first year that they grew Georgia candy roaster squash at the site was an absolute bumper crop of a year. They just had mounds of squash come out of that site. They were bringing them out by the truckload. Pat was kind of looking, going, this is so easy. And then after that, it was never that easy again. The pest found us, the heat got hotter. And so I think it was the second or third year of growing Georgia candy roaster squash, they were having this issue that they were going out, and the squash was just dying really in a matter of hours. And so the staff actually sat there and watched it one day, and they were able to see it go from healthy plants that morning to just dead slime on the ground by that afternoon. And so an example of what I'm talking about, you can see that this is the squash plant. There's still some healthy looking leaves here along the top of the picture, but then you can see all these vines running through here that have no leaf on them, and that's because the leaves are slime on the ground. Now the squash itself looks pretty good. At this point they have that peach color. They are edible squash. The issue that we run into when they're dying early, even though the squash is edible, is that the seeds aren't viable yet. So we'll have good squash that's going to taste great, but the seeds haven't quite gotten far enough along yet for us to be able to do anything with them. And so it took them some research. They actually sat down, and it took them a little while to figure out what was going on. But what we eventually figured out was that it was a bacteria that's carried in the gut of the cucumber beetle. There's a couple different types of cucumber beetles. One of them are those little green-looking ladybugs. They carry a bacteria in their stomach that is not native to the Americas. It was introduced. And whenever they eat on squash plants, they put that bacteria into the plant. It happens with any squash plant they eat on. Most of our modern varieties, though, have some resistance to this bacteria. Our heirloom variety had no resistance to the bacteria. And it took us a couple more years to figure this out, but it wasn't the wilt alone that was killing the plants. It was the wilt combined with the heat. When you introduce incredibly high, 93-degree plus heat in with that wilt, it was just killing the plants within hours. And so we've worked over the years. Prior to this, we really, really tried hard not to use any pesticides in the garden. But at that point, we finally had to start using pesticides, because what we have found is that on years when we're growing Georgia candy roaster squash, if I don't try to treat the pest at all, I can't keep the plants alive anymore. And so we try to use as few as we can. We try to do as much by hand as we can. But the vine borers have kept us from being able, once they were introduced in, once they found us, we have a really, really hard time keeping vine borers off of it. And once they get into those plants, again, they just kill them very quickly. And so we have had to use pesticides on the Georgia candy roaster squash. Generally, we don't have to use it on anything else. Cherokee Tam pumpkin, we have so far, I say that, I should probably knock on wood. We haven't had to use any sort of pesticides on it, but it just kind of goes to show that when you're gardening, you're always going to have something. Some years are good years, some years are bad years. Some years it's the heat that gets us. It can be droughts, it can be grass. There's all those different things. We still experience it, and you'll think you've got it down, and then the next year it'll be something else that gets introduced. So gardening is always an area where you're learning, and you're having to adapt every year. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about cultural forestry. Cherokees are a people of the eastern deciduous forest. What do you think of when you think of the forest? Trees. We have to have the trees to have a forest. However, in our case especially, oftentimes the trees are important. We do use the trees for medicine, but they're not always the most important part of that forest. They provide the environment that gives the home to all of these other plants that aren't trees, but that can't exist without that environment. And that's really important for us to teach people, because for a long time we kind of fought back and forth. A lot of people thought that if we go through and we clear cut an eastern deciduous forest, as long as we replace the trees, we replace the forest, right? But if you replace all those trees with something like pine trees, you end up with a whole different environment. Pines change the way light filters through, they change the pH of the soil. There's just a lot of things that can't grow under pines. So pine forests are not going to be the type of environment that we're going to find in an eastern deciduous forest. So, what is this plant? Eastern red cedar. Cedar is an incredibly important plant for us, mainly in that it's cleansing. This is the plant that we're going to use to clean negative out of an area. We've already seen this one. Tobacco, jola. Again, tobacco, good for ceremonial medicinal purposes. This is a little bit of a tough plant because you really won't find it here. You can go a couple hours away and find it, but you really don't find it a whole lot here. Ginseng. This is American ginseng. So whenever you look at a lot of energy drinks, oftentimes energy drinks will list a lot of the ingredients and things around the top of the cans, stuff that's specifically used for energy. Next time that you're looking at the cans, read them. A lot of them will say ginseng. That's not referring to American ginseng. It's referring to the Asian version of ginseng. But that's kind of similar to how we would use it. We would use teas from ginseng, oftentimes, especially before the men would go out to war. So this one is golden seal. Golden seal is known to be high in alkaloids. Oftentimes it's used for some different types of skin conditions and things. I know it was used, I think, if somebody had been shot by an arrow. But the main thing on it is that it actually has some fungicide properties. And when people go out, I don't know if anybody had ever watched the show Ginseng Pickers that used to come on, but I remember watching the show one time, and the men, as they were going out to hunt for ginseng, what they were looking for first was golden seal. You almost always find these two plants growing together. Ginseng has a tendency of attracting certain types of fungus to its roots, and if it gets overloaded, it will kill the plant. Golden seal has antifungal properties, and so it will actually protect the ginseng. So you almost always see them growing together, but you're more likely to find golden seal before you find ginseng. This isn't the best picture. This one is prairie willow. It's also referred to as red root. It does have a bright red root. This is a plant that grows as both a male and a female version. It has a whole bunch of different medicinal uses. One thing is that for a lot of our grounds, they would have to have a tea from this before certain ceremonies. This plant is a great example on why using common names isn't always the best, because we often refer to this one as red root too. And just like prairie willow, it does have a very bright red root. They are nowhere near being the same plant though. This is New Jersey tea. It gets its common name because when the Boston Tea Party occurred, all the tea was dumped into the harbor. The settlers, not having any tea coming over from Europe, not being able to trade, started looking at alternatives that were kind of close to them, and really started looking at what the native peoples were drinking as an alternative to the tea. This is one that took off, which is why they started calling it New Jersey tea. Has great flavor. It's got some good medicinal properties to it. Doesn't really have any caffeine to it though. Anybody know this one? Rattlesnake master, yes. Just like the name suggests, we actually believe that snakes don't like it and they will generally stay away from it. There was a piece of the root that was used to treat snake bites, and it's often referred to as a warrior's plant because they were supposed to carry it with them at all times, but I think a good portion of people would carry it with them because if it was kind of believed if you had it with you, then you were less likely to have anybody who was going to intend harm on you from harassing you. So those are the 7 sacred plants of the Cherokee. Of course, 7 is an important number for us. It's a sacred number for us. It's why we have 7 clans. We also had 7 sacred plants. Anyone know this one? This is Sweet Everlasting. Sweet Everlasting is in the Asteraceae family, so it's in that sunflower family, but doesn't have that traditional sunflower look. Very sweet smelling. This kind of has high in menthol, and so it tends to be used for a lot of congestion problems. It's kind of funny because everybody always say it smells like butterscotch. Years ago, Pat and I actually went ahead and went out and dug one of these up and transplanted it into the garden. It made it for the first year and then never would come back after that. But what we both always agreed, because anytime that we were out in the field, anytime that we got close to this plant, I really didn't smell butterscotch. I always thought it kind of smelled like sweet cat urine. And Pat agreed, and he often said it smelled the same way. And so we transplanted this thing into the garden, and for about the first 2 weeks, I could not stand to get within about 20, 30 feet of it because it just had a very strong scent. It's sweet, but it had a strong scent aside from that. After about 2 to 3 weeks, though, it took a turn, and then it smelled very much like just sweet butterscotch. So I don't know if it's the time of year or if it's the environment, but I always look for either one of those 2 smells when we're looking for Sweet Everlasting. Anybody know this one? It's a little bit hard. We could make this one a little bit easier by having the white flower on the plant. This is bloodroot. So when you dig up bloodroot, it has a very bright red-orange root. And when you touch it, it's almost like it kind of bleeds on your fingers, and it will dye your fingers a really bright red-orange color. One of our best basket dyes. Cherokees were oftentimes renowned by a lot of the people, a lot of the Europeans and settlers who stayed with us for being some of the best basket weavers in the world. And the main reason for that is we were weaving split pieces of river cane. River cane's hard to work with, it's hard to gather, it's hard to split, it's hard to weave, it's hard to dye. Bloodroot is one of the things that will dye river cane and doesn't really fade out over time. We have a couple other ones, but that's why bloodroot is such a favorite. I know we have some people in here who know this one. Watercress. Watercress is actually not native to the Americas. There is some debate as to how it was naturalized here. Some people say it was Lewis and Clark as they traveled up and down the river that they were actually introducing watercress in. There's been some suggestion, though, that it might have even been when the Vikings, who were here before Columbus, came over and visited, that they might have introduced it in. Regardless, watercress has now been naturalized across North America. It's a good green to eat. It tends to grow in a lot of different types of waterways, flowing waterways, still waterways. It's very highly suggested. Clean it well, and the favorite way for Cherokees to cook everything, any type of green especially, is to fry it up in bacon grease. But you can make it a little bit healthier, and you can also eat this raw. Lots of good nutrients, minerals in that green. Not the best picture of this one. This is high bush huckleberry. So it would have been nice to have one that had berries on it, but this is kind of becoming a hard plant to find. Very, very tasty, but it can take you so long to gather these that a lot of people tell stories about how even an hour after gathering huckleberries that they could still hear the plunk on the bottom of their metal pails as they were tossing the berries in. That might also be due to eating them as they're gathering them, though. Everybody know this one? Wild onions. So a lot of those spring greens, those things that come up for the very, very first in spring, wild onions, cochan, all of that was seen to be blood purifiers. After going all winter long without having those fresh foods, fresh vegetables, these were the things that were really known to get the blood going again. Of course, wild onions, very tasty. We love wild onions and eggs. Echinacea. Echinacea, of course, is a known immune system booster. And also, We do give this one out through the seed bank. If you want a flower that's going to be beautiful in the garden all summer long, continually flower, and also attract pollinators, this is a great plant. So some people are familiar with this one, some people aren't. Years ago, when I was working at the Heritage Center, I was in school going, of course, for biology at the time. And so one of the guys that was working with us that summer, they had gone out to gather river cane that morning. And while they were out gathering river cane, he runs across this red berry-looking thing and brings it back out to us, asked me. He said, "Feather, what is this?" I look at it. I have no clue. And I tell him, I have no idea. And so he said, "I'm pretty sure this is something that our ancestors probably ate, and I really want to try it. It kind of smells peppery. I know this is going to be good." And I looked at him and I said, "We do not eat things that we do not know what they are." It's bright red, which is already a warning sign, and we have no clue what it is. And him and I go back and forth, and eventually I think I have talked him out of this. A few hours go by. Come that afternoon, he comes back to me and says, "Feather, we really need to figure out what that plant was because I went ahead and I tried it." And I don't know if you've never been out to the Heritage Center in the Diligwa Village. The whole point is that we're a recreational village of the 1700s, and we're not supposed to have our cell phones. Everybody pulls out their cell phones, and we all start Googling. And what I eventually find out is that, yes, this is green dragon. There's also a cousin to it, Jack in the Pulpit. They're very, very closely related. Both of them, they look a little bit different, but both of them get these red cones on them. It is toxic. Fortunately, it is not one of two plants that will outright, could really be dangerous. Mainly on this one, it's going to upset your system. So in his case, he said it felt like somebody was taking needles and just stabbing them into his tongue and his throat over and over again. He had to spend the rest of the day, he had to go home and spend the rest of the day very close to a restroom. Pat Gwynn had tried this, and Pat had a very similar experience. He said it was like having razor blades sliced across his tongue and throat. And both of them said the same thing. So in most cases, most toxic plants taste bad enough that you're probably not going to eat that much of it unless you're really desperate. This isn't one of those plants. Apparently, it's very tasty. It tastes wonderful, kind of a sweet, peppery flavoring to it. And they both said you could eat enough of this one to hurt you really bad. And it doesn't take very much to be very unpleasant. So a great example on why we want to know what plants are. But this is a medicinal plant for us. However, this was not a medicinal plant that would have been lightly used. This was one that was specifically administered by medicine men. Anybody know this one? American basket flower, yes. We always show this one because it is a little bit of a trick. This one is American basket flower. So, of course, thistle, Scotch thistle, bull thistle are introduced plants. They are exotic invasives that have taken over, and farmers hate them. Cherokees love them because we like to use thistle for the downy part of our darts. However, prior to having thistle, we used American basket flower. You can also use things like squirrel tails. There's a couple other plants, but basket flower is a good one. It kind of looks like it, but it is not thorny. This is actually pretty soft, and the rest of the plant is just a really pretty plant. Again, it's a great plant to have. We give it through the seed bank. It's good for pollinator gardens. American goldfinches love echinacea and American basket flower. But the white fuzzy downy spot in it is just not quite as, you don't get quite as much of the down out of a basket flower as you do a thistle. So thistle has really become the favorite. Because it's easier to find, it's so numerous, and also there's more down in each flower. Anybody know? Well, first off, what is this? Poison ivy, leaves of 3. 1, 2, 3, let it be. What is this? Virginia creeper. Is Virginia creeper toxic? No. So poison ivy, poison oak, and poison sumac all store urushiol oil in their leaves, and it's the urushiol that causes allergic outbreaks. Poison ivy is the only one that we have here in this area. Contrary to popular belief, technically sumac and poison oak don't grow here, but oftentimes they will get confused because a lot of people actually confuse Virginia creeper for poison oak since they tend to grow in the same places. The Cherokee for both of these plants is uleti, which refers to the fact that they're vines and they climb upon, but that is the only reason that they're both called uleti. They tend to grow in the same areas. Virginia creeper leafs before poison ivy, and it keeps its leaves longer than poison ivy, but regardless of when you come into contact with the vine, poison ivy is going to cause an allergic outbreak. And so you'll see these two things growing together, and people think that Virginia creeper is the problem. The plant in the middle, anybody know it? Uluri nuwot. Nuwot is our word for medicine. This is jewelweed, and jewelweed has a chemical in it that binds to urushiol oil and will render it inactive, which is why it's medicine for poison ivy. It's not going to help if you've already had poison ivy for a few days and it's blistering and it's set in. What this specifically does is it removes the urushiol oil, which is really hard to wash off. So if you know you've come into contact with one of these, you can use jewelweed to wash it off, especially if you're out in the environment. And we're going to go through this very quickly. This one's sassafras. Sassafras has 3 distinct leaves. We've got the sock. It has no lobes. We've got the mitten, which just has a single lobe. It's kind of down here in the middle, but it's hard to see. And then we have the glove, the ghost, or the turkey track, which is 2 lobes. Sassafras is a blood thinner. Ozark chinkapin. So the eastern deciduous forest was made up 40% of the American chestnut. The American chestnut has been wiped out by the chestnut blight, which is why we don't really see them. Most people are familiar with those. We did not have chestnuts here in this part of the country, though. So once we came into Indian Territory, we had Ozark chinkapin. Very closely related, also affected by the chestnut blight, which is why we don't see them anymore. But the nut is very nutritious. People tend to love them. Mullein is also an introduced plant, not native here, but it is something that we have adopted because it has so many uses. A lot of people kind of use it similar to tobacco. It's used for teething babies. It's used for arthritis. Has a lot of good properties. Anybody know this? Wishy. Wishy is one of those mushrooms that even if you don't like mushrooms, you tend to like wishy. And then, of course, morels. Common morels, 2 of the most popular mushrooms. And then also owl's head. We call it uguku. We oftentimes call it owl's head, but you'll also hear lion's mane, old man's beard. So even in native plants, we tend to have issues. This is prairie willow. Prairie willow grows as a male and a female, and it was really hard to find that out. We had to do a lot of research because we were told we needed to have both, but nobody could tell us how to tell the difference. Males are red and fuzzy. Females are green and spiky. After a lot of research, we were finally able to find them, but going off of that, our first plant was a male. It took us weeks, months to find a female to eventually get introduced into the site, and they do not grow as easily as males. Every year, prairie willow is an edge species. It grows really, really well in edgy areas. However, we have had issues finding it, and so we actually had to go out, start taking our prairie willow, we take off clippings of it, and then we start new plants out of the garden. Just to offer a way, if we have people who really need it for medicinal purposes, there is an area where they can actually come, because it's the root that you need to use. So it's a very easy plant to over-harvest, and it has been over-harvested. So it's getting hard to find, which is kind of amazing because it really grows so easily. And then this is our Cherokee Nation Medicine Keepers. They are instrumental in all that we do. They are a group of first language speakers who have medicine knowledge, who like to get together just to be able to preserve that knowledge. This was Crosland Smith. He just passed recently, but Crosland was really their spiritual leader for a long time. And it was his thinking of our capacity to do good is for all people that we constantly work forward with. This is some of the students that they have actually worked with, college students that they were able to give some medicine knowledge to over about a 5-course year. So that was kind of the whole idea. We just like to let people see ethnobiology in action and kind of see some of the different projects that they were working on, and also find ways of sharing that knowledge in a way that was respectful, because being too open about medicine knowledge can be taboo, but they also wanted to make sure that it was going to get spread to the next generation. All right, Wadon.
Hey, Wadon, Feather, well, we appreciate it. A question that often comes up is if I get heirloom seeds, and I think you talked about it earlier, and I grow seeds in my garden wherever I live, can I send those back to the bank, or do I need to just share them among my community?
We ask that you share them amongst your community. So when we started the program, we started it as to be an exchange, to have people send seeds back, and we started very quickly running into issues. Part of it is, sometimes seeds get confused, sometimes seeds were getting damaged. It wound up really kind of costing a lot, and mailing costs keep getting more and more and more expensive. And so what we're trying to really get people to do now, and we want to get more training out and available so that if people have questions on how to harvest, how to store, all of those things, that we want to get some of that information more accessible. And so we're working on that. But now what we're asking is share amongst your community, share with other citizens, and especially we're working a lot with our CCO groups to get some really good genetic stock into their hands so that they can also grow their own gardens and then distribute amongst themselves. Because when you're growing in one area, your seeds will start to adapt for that area. So our seeds have started to adapt for where we're growing here. But then we have citizens who live down in Austin in completely different environments. And over time, if they keep growing seeds in that environment, those seeds will do better in those areas. If they send those back to us and then we wind up getting confused and those go north, they're not going to perform as well as something else. So we really ask, share them amongst your community, and if you're kind of having a hard time doing that, get in touch with us. We can get you in touch with your nearest CCO group, and they are always looking to help distribute those seeds out as well.
Well, let's give her a round of applause.
Well done.
Well done to God. Go to dog, go hunt. Hey.